Richard Kemp, welcome back to Australia and to speak to the Jewish community on behalf of the Australian Jewish Association.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I only wish that I was actually in Australia rather than just speaking to Australia from a very wet and relatively cold England. But I have just arrived back in England from a couple of weeks in Israel, where the weather's fantastic and, of course, the country's brilliant.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Were you there on a business type of trip? Were you on a speaking tour, or were you there on pleasure?
Well, it's always being in Israel is always pleasure in itself, but my purpose of being there was business related and security related, and in particular looking at the current threat from Iran, including the Iranian nuclear program, but also the aggression that Iran is showing towards Israel by trying to build up a greater presence along the Syria border and on the Lebanese border.
Are you working in a private capacity or on behalf of the British government?
No, not really. I'm pretty much a private individual these days.
Okay. All right. Now, Richard, the whole world is fixated on Donald Trump's shock withdrawal of America's 50 or so troops from Syria. The Trump haters are having a field day, and the Trump supporters are a bit confused. Firstly, can you explain what communication took place between Erdogan of Turkey, the leader of Turkey, and Donald Trump to suddenly make this controversial decision to move the troops?
I don't think any of us have the answer to that question, but one thing that I would say is that my understanding is that Erdogan made it clear that he was going to launch an operation into northern Syria, and that would happen come what may. And I think that's been on the cards for a long time. So it wasn't. I don't think. I mean, from my understanding, I don't think it was a question of President Trump agreeing to pull the forces back to allow a Syrian operation. I think the Syrian operation would have happened anyway. And I think what President Trump succeeded in doing, which in my opinion is a good thing, is to avoid a clash between the Americans and the Turks. And of course, there are losers in it as well, and some of those losers include the Kurds.
Well, I want to get to that. I mean, the Kurds are not. They're not a single homogenous sort of people. They're scattered over 4 countries. Which Kurds do we in the West support, and why?
Well, I think it's a good and complicated question to which there probably isn't an answer. But the ones that the Americans in particular, and to a lesser extent the British, were working in coordination with in Syria, were basically a Kurdish entity that is closely aligned with the PKK, and the PKK is a proscribed terrorist organization, prescribed in the US, prescribed in Turkey and other countries, which has killed large numbers of Turks in their long-standing campaign to achieve autonomy for Syria, and of course that's the reason why the Turkish government wants to go after the Kurds in this region, and I would say that the American alliance with those Kurds has infuriated Turkey over many years, and the main reason for it was really part, I think, of President Obama's nuclear appeasement of Iran, because those Kurds are pro-Iran and they're pro-Assad. They're not opposed to either of those entities, and Obama felt that by allying himself with them, it wouldn't anger the Iranians at a time when he was trying to pull off that flawed nuclear deal. And so it's not as simple and straightforward a situation as as many commentators I think seem to believe.
Yeah, that's true. Now, from a military point of view, how does this new set of circumstances affect Israel? One Israel general I was reading, I think his name is General Amidor. I don't know if you've met him, Amidor.
Yes.
He claims the pullout, in essence, he claims the pullout will not change much for Israel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, General Yakov Amidror, who was a little while ago was the Israeli National Security Advisor. I agree with him. I agree with him on most things, actually, but I do agree with him on this. And a lot of, while I was in Israel in the last couple of weeks, a lot of Israelis, including media commentators and others, have been saying that, that the US, what has been described, and I don't agree with this description, particularly with what's been described as the US betrayal of the Kurds, indicates that Israel can't depend on the US anymore, which simply is not true. I think the fact is that the United States is the greatest ally that Israel has, and today under President Trump it's greater than it's ever been in terms of their staunch support for Israel. Of course, another country that is a very strong supporter of Israel is your own country, which is, I think, to its credit, has been a long-term strong supporter of Israel. But I don't think that this indicates any danger for Israel. And one of the reasons for that is because Israel has never asked any country, including the United States, to fight for Israel. Yes, they need assistance, they need support politically, they need some funding support and defense equipment support, in some cases technology. What they don't need is troops to go and fight and die on their behalf, and they've never asked for them.
But would you say a lot of Israelis are concerned about what they describe as a betrayal of the Kurds, and so do they think that America would betray Israel?
I think there is a lot of concern among the Israelis over current developments in Syria and in the Gulf region, and partly that's because of what's been happening over the Kurds, and also a failure by the US or anyone else really to respond to Iranian aggression against Saudi Arabia and the oil tankers in the Gulf. So there is concern, but I think that concern is largely based on bad analysis by some media commentators, because I really don't think that Israel has any cause to be concerned about it. I think America remains a staunch and strong ally of Israel, and I believe always will do, and particularly with President Trump in the White House.
That's right. Of course, if the government of America ever changed and the Democrats come in, that would be certainly another story, wouldn't it?
I think Israel's got quite a lot to fear in that situation. If, for example, President Trump lost the next election, or indeed the one after that, obviously he can only serve 2 terms, but there is likely to be a backlash if the Democrats get into power again in the US against all of the good things, in my opinion, that President Trump has done for Israel. And whatever anyone thinks about President Trump or his policies elsewhere, few can deny that they've been extremely good for Israel. And that has caused anger among some Democrats, and will probably cause a backlash against Israel when and if the Democrats regain power.
Yeah, that's true, and that's my argument to many of the Jewish supporters or anti-Trump people, because I say, look, don't wish for a change, because you could end up with the Democrats under Bernie Sanders or any of the so-called squad. That's not something that would be good for the Jewish community of America or for Israel-US relations. Don't you agree?
I agree completely, and I think unfortunately, I think that that the America is going to have that situation. It's like every other country. Politics goes round in various cycles, and there will be a time when people who are not strongly supportive of Israel are in charge in America, and I think it's something that needs to be planned for and guarded against right now, because too many people, I think, are very complacent now about Israeli-US relations, which is right at the moment, but it's going to be challenging in the future.
Well, that's right. We certainly wouldn't want to end up in a position like what's happening in the UK. we won't go on there. That's a whole nother set of conversation. Anyway, look, the line's not fantastic.
We won't mention the C word.
We won't mention the C word. That's right. Look, it's been fantastic to catch up with you again, Richard. We enjoyed your company down in Melbourne. You certainly had some controversial times in Sydney at the university. We still remember all that. and you're a good friend of the Jewish community and of Israel, and we're very lucky to have you. Thank you very much. Travel safe, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much. I very much hope so, and good wishes to all of your listeners in Australia.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.